Welcome, everybody. Good evening. My name is Steve Levett. I am the director of the Sustainability Clinic at the University of York. Sustainability Clinic is a clinic that offers students the opportunity to take part in climate-related projects with real partners as part of a module, irrespective of whatever discipline they come from. We've got a really eclectic panel tonight to discuss the future of higher education in a climate crisis. Actually, I'm just looking at the title and thinking maybe our title should be something like the future of higher education for a climate crisis, or I don't know. Anyway, these are one of the things that we might want to consider as we go along. We're going to try a bit of a thought experiment tonight. We thought rather than just kind of all do presentations, we try and have a genuine conversation, because I think all of us here tonight are united in our various ways with an interest in doing things differently in education, linked to or driven by an interest in responding to the climate crisis, and kind of a very big question about whether or not that higher education system in the countries that we come from is actually fit for purpose anymore, and whether or not something completely different is required. So I'm going to go around and ask the panelists to introduce themselves very briefly. I'm going to take this in no particular order, just on the order that you appear on my screen. So Sue, you're the unlucky first victim.
Hi, everyone. I'm a practicing lawyer working on human rights and the environment, and I also run a legal clinic at King's College London, working on environmental cases, both in the UK and in the global south.
And thank you for that. Francesco.
Thank you. I'm Francesco Pomponi. I'm a professor of sustainability and environment at the University of York. I work with both industry and academia on sustainability-related matters.
Thank you. Federico?
Hi, my name is Federico. I'm the head of study at KaosPilot, which is an independent higher education institution focused on social innovation and societal transformation, located in Aarhus, Denmark.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Tony.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Tony Reames. I'm a professor of environment and sustainability at the University of Michigan in the US, and like Stephen, direct a sustainability clinic that pairs students and faculty with community-based organizations and local government.
Yeah, and I should just point out we're both directors of sustainability clinics, but we have very different styles and approaches. Tony, I think yours is more masters orientated and over a longer period of time than ours, which is just a short 20 credit semester long module. So some interesting differences there. We might want to explore why we do it in those different ways maybe later on. Okay, so as I say, we joined together because of our interest in higher education, and the feeling, I think perhaps maybe I can express it in this way, that the feeling that things just aren't working right, and that we're not sure that we're actually delivering students in a kind of way that is ready to enable them to cope with the coming crises that we're seeing all around us. So I'm going to ask you a really big, broad question, and Tony, you might want to jump in on this first, because it was kind of you that inspired this question. It's about, what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve here? And you talked a little bit when we were preparing for this about the problems of, maintaining a commitment to truth at a time of, what could be seen as attacks on higher education and on truth itself.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, and I look forward to hearing how others view this. It's no secret to anyone listening to us today that the US is definitely in a moment of political, ideological crisis. Attacks on higher education like we've never seen before, whether it's attacks on kind of freedom of academic expression. Universities are places of political expression, attacks on that, all the way down to fundamental attacks on the type of research and the funding for research that we do. And so we've seen over the last 6 months of the current administration a total reduction of millions of dollars in research, many of that focused on society, focused on how we attack the climate crisis. The word sustainability is even under attack. And this is coming after almost 2 decades of advancing sustainability and climate work in the US. And so what we see is that our students are concerned about the names of their degrees when they graduate, the type of classes that they're taking. We've even talked about, do we change names of classes that we teach? Because there's fear that because all of our classes are published online, will we get attacked and the university lose resources because we're teaching certain types of classes? And so that's a critical moment of reflection for us in higher education. Do we stay committed to what we really value and believe in this kind of temporary moment? Because we assume that this won't be the mainstay for how the federal government at least views higher education. But a lot of our universities, we're not national universities, right? We're either state public universities or religious-based universities. And so is our responsibility to the publics that we serve in our states, or do we capitulate to this kind of federal attack? And we know that the issue is so real. And so these are conversations that we're having. I don't have an answer for us today, but yeah, I would love to see how this is showing up in other places. Because for us, it's pretty fresh, right? We've had a lot of freedom and have benefited from that for decades. And so we're struggling right now.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should throw that question out to the other panelists, the question of what is the situation in their countries and their areas of work insofar as government interference or challenge to notions such as climate change and sustainability and freedom of expression. I mean, maybe we'll see. I'll come to you in a second, but maybe Federico, I could ask you from the perspective of both an Italian and somebody who's worked for a long time in Denmark, which is always perceived to be, you know, a cradle of social democracy and permissiveness and, you know, freedom of expression and thought. I mean, what's the situation there at the moment?
Well, I honestly, I cannot speak very much about Italy because I haven't lived there in a long time. But when it comes to Denmark, we are in a really like fortunate situation, I would say, because when it like in terms of like freedom of expression or like climate and having climate at the top of the agenda, this is like all main discussions in, you know, every realm and every corner of the country. But it's actually quite funny because today we're just talking about this at KP because we are KaosPilot, because we are in a cycle of transformation and innovation, and what you know, very much speaking is like what is needed from us and what is the world calling us for. And I hope none of my colleagues are listening to this conversation, but we are in a situation in which the government fundamentally is asking us to prove what kind of jobs our student can get. And if there is a starting question, I think we get some problems. So I would say we can definitely talk about it. It's definitely you know, on everybody's top agenda, but at the same time, maybe we are asking ourselves the wrong question when we enter that discussion, even here in Denmark.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. Sue, do you want to sort of have a talk about, you know, what's going on in England? And of course, I know you've also been working a bit in India as well, which might be an interesting perspective. If you've got anything to share on that.
Yeah, so I should explain that our clinic has a partnership with a legal clinic in India where we're trying to tackle rising sea levels as they affect a huge river delta close to Calcutta. And we work with local NGOs and lawyers there. And one of the lawyers who teaches on our kind of transnational module had a big tax raid, was investigated by the government, had to swat up on tax law to defend himself. He's not allowed, he's recently come to the UK to meet us, wasn't allowed to leave without getting the High Court's permission. And his perspective, I suppose, is something like adaptation. So he focuses on local issues really affecting communities. He's had to change the kind of work that he does. So he's had to avoid going off after huge coal corporations, which he used to do before. And another example of an NGO that we were collaborating with there that set up a sustainability project with the rural community where they have ecotourism, they have fish farm, they have a little kind of primary school teaching about environmental issues. And they had a partnership with Australians on re-establishing the local trams in Calcutta, which was a kind of public transport. There's a huge amount of air pollution there. And you'd have thought trams were fairly neutral issue, but the lawyer was investigated and, you know, by the local authority for being involved with that tram project. So yeah, I think on the other hand, it has worked for the university and the lawyers to be connected with education, because education is seen as something neutral as compared to human rights defence or environmental defence. So we've tried to provide some protection for the local lawyers and NGOs by talking about them as teachers, educating law students, teaching them clinical skills. So yeah, I think it's very much about adapting to that environment. But the challenge in the UK is resources, which Steve could probably say more about. You know, the kind of doing this kind of work has been really tricky because I haven't been able to get resources that communities in the global south and institutions in the global south need to be able to do, you know, this kind of work to tackle the climate and nature crisis.
Yeah, thank you. Francesco, I'm going to come to you, but I'm going to just move the conversation on a little bit. I mean, you might want to still respond to what you've heard so far, but it does strike me that in a way, one of the other questions I suggest we think about was whether or not we're dealing with a problem now, or whether we're looking really to thinking about how do you respond at some point in the future. And I think that's quite that's a challenging question for all of us. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or what's gone before, Francesco.
I have lots of thoughts. I just need to decide what I answer to. I'll start from the last point. So I think universities need to do two things, and both are very important. One is to educate, the other one is to instruct. And being Italian, I can help go back to Latin. So educate is comes from exducere, it's taking out. Instruct is instruere, is putting in. So one is very much bottom up. It's more longer term. You help the student, you know, become something, develop something. The other one is a concept, a notion, a skill that is needed. And I think if we contextualize the climate crisis, there's solutions that we have today that need to be implemented, and we know that they need to be implemented. And for that, we need instruction. So I think we need to train people and transfer the skills that have been developed already so that these people can go out and have an impact. There's also problems that we don't have a solution for. And for that, we need research. We need to educate. We need to make sure that we develop thinkers that then go on and with their brains can fix many of the problems. Also, many of the unknown problems that we don't know what are going to be. So I think sometimes we oversimplify the climate crisis in thinking that it's either a technological problem or a behavioral problem. It's a lot more complex. I worked in Central America, South America, Sub-Saharan Africa. The sustainability problem is always different. It's never the same. There isn't a blanket approach. So we need a lot of people tackling this with different skills at the same time.
Yeah. Anybody else want to comment on the question about whether or not this is something that we need to be doing now? And I guess linked to that, I guess the question is whether or not we can do what we want to do now. So, for example, Francesco's just raised this issue of interconnectedness. And having worked, you know, for a couple of years on a multidisciplinary project within a traditional higher education institute, I'm wholly conscious of the difficulties that poses, and we can talk about some of those maybe later on. But I mean, Tony, I can see you nodding. I don't know if you wanted to maybe pick up on that.
Yeah, I think Francesco brought up the challenge that we as educators / instructors face, right? You know, there are issues that are in the now, right? So I'm in Detroit, Michigan, which is a city that has seen a renaissance coming back from bankruptcy, years of disinvestment from the public sector and private corporations. But now a massive infusion of investment in that city, but that comes with a ton of challenges of how you take a disinvested city and transform it and bring about a renaissance equitably, right? So we're dealing with present issues of a housing crisis, an energy affordability crisis, but then that is also, you know, has the intersection with the climate crisis, which the solutions we might create now and teach our students about and send out people in the workforce now will be impacted by what is to come. So whether that's rising precipitation, and so flooding has nothing to do with the housing crisis or the energy crisis as we think about it, but both of those issues will be impacted where people can live, what happens to the current neighborhoods that are now being flooded as we have more rain events. And so we have to begin to think about how we train people for thinking about solutions that are looking 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line. And as an engineer, you know, sometimes our models are based on a 100-year storm that is happening, you know, every 5 years now, right? And so, yeah, that's a challenge for us to, you know, change our minds as instructors and faculty members, but also to have that in the plan for how the university delivers education.
And I can see Federico's nodding at that, because Federico, I don't know if you want to just maybe say a few words about KaosPilots, because in my head, they are kind of doing a lot of the stuff that I would like to be doing. They're already doing it now and have been doing it for a number of years. But am I right in thinking they had to actually step outside of the Danish educational system in order to kind of, you know, model themselves? Yeah,
it's an in and out kind of relationship. Yes, good. Fundamentally, because we are trying to like tackle these questions, like, or like really going a little beyond like what do we have, what are the challenges now, how do we approach them, how we try to solve them, and actually this is the fundamental question that we're looking at right now, right? Because we are like experiencing like climate crisis is just manifestations of many interconnected crises, and fundamentally it's just, you know, it's just a failure of an old system that we're all nested within. So for us, like fundamentally, the question is not very much like what kind of solution can we build upon, but it's like what kind of relation do we want to have with the world and with reality and with nature and beyond that. So it's, if we look at it as a failure of relationality fundamentally, then what do we need to unlearn? What are the systems that we need to free ourselves from, beliefs, paradigms that we have to free ourselves on, so that whichever potential solution we can find for the future is not stemmed from the same, you know, challenges and problems that has brought us here, or mindset that has brought us here. And again, KaosPilot, as you were just to give a little drop, it's been around for 30 years and has had many iterations, because the idea is very much like how can we face the world, how can we engage with the world with the challenges we have right now, with the students at the very forefront of everything. And we have this saying that everything starts and everything ends with the students. So we're always on our toes. On a hand, it's you know, it's a bit challenging. On the other is that, you know, we're always called forward in what we do and how we think about going about. So it's also balancing how do we hold the past, how do we honor the past if we want the knowledge, the experiences, how do we engage with the present, and how do we midwife the future in whichever you know articulation that comes out.
Yeah, I love your phrases there, honoring the past, you know, engaging with the present, and midwifing the future. That was a fantastic phrase. And I'm also struck by that notion of unlearning as well. I think that's a very interesting issue to put before our institutions as to whether or not we are engaged in any kind of process of helping the students to deconstruct what they've learned before they arrive, and whether we've even considered whether that's actually a necessity. Sue, I'll come to you in a second, because I know that it might be relevant actually, in the sense that I know that King's Legal Clinic has often, like a lot of legal clinics, has sometimes had a not a difficult relationship with academic staff, but there's sometimes a dichotomy between people who are involved in sort of academic legal work and people who are involved in clinical work. Maybe we could just explore that for a few seconds. But Francesco, I don't know what you think about this notion of unlearning.
Quite needed, I think, especially in my field, which is the built environment. It actually impacts also some key decisions, both from the government and funding. So one example, maybe for the audience to relate to. It's already been decided by the government that off-site construction, so these modular buildings built outside and then brought on site and stack them on top of each other, are sustainable. Now, if you look for the evidence base, the research base, it's not really there. So the research still needs to be done to prove this. But as a result, because the government has already decided what the answer is, there is a problem in securing funding to do the research that then answers the question we need to answer. So sometimes there's the need to work with the students to ensure that whatever is the knowledge that they bring into university gets challenged quite early on, to ensure that they can go back to not really a blank slate, but at least the necessary ground to relearn and learn in a different way, more critically engaged with the topic.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I mentioned the kind of the sort of dichotomy between the practitioners who get involved in clinic quite often and the academics, and sometimes it's almost like there's a divide between those two sides of learning. Is that something you would recognize?
Well, I came into academia as a practitioner because I wanted to get some of the resources of our universities, which are very wealthy compared to, a tiny NGO in Latin America that's facing, multinational mining company, for example. And I found that even academics that are teaching mining and are preparing the corporate lawyers of the future are interested in getting involved in those kind of opportunities to support communities. And I was going to say, on the question of the timelines, it's 5 years since 80 UK universities declared a climate emergency, but there's still very little happening. We don't have climate and sustainability embedded in our curriculums. The examples like York of your sustainability clinic are few and far between, yet the research shows that that's what students want, that they look at this when they decide where they want to go and study. And we're talking about overseas students. 68% of students apparently think that UK universities should be encouraging and facilitating student sustainability projects within the local community. So I think that universities are really lagging behind what students want on this.
That's a very interesting point, actually. That statistic is interesting, because I think from my perspective, I can actually say that we've been running a module now. We're in our second year, fourth semester, fourth time round, effectively, and we have a lot of interest, but we perhaps don't have as big numbers as we would hope, bearing in mind that the module is open to any student from any discipline in the final year of their undergraduate or postgraduate program. So I wonder if there's a little bit of we want you to do things, but we ourselves don't actually have the time or interest because we're too busy getting jobs. I mean, Tony, it'd be interesting because you're an engineer, obviously, and I guess you must have encountered a lot of engineering students who are exactly of that mindset. They don't really want to engage with anything unless it's technical expertise that enables them to secure the best possible engineering job that they can get.
Yeah, so a couple of things the conversation made me think about. The University of Michigan had two big efforts, one on decolonizing education. And so small grants for faculty and even student groups to apply to help their professors decolonize their syllabi, to kind of help their units on campus decolonize. But we also had a huge anti-racism effort that is kind of starting to wind down now. And so we had these two kind of parallel tracks that have been trying to change the way we teach and the way, as a public university, we show up in society. The clinic kind of came out of some of those efforts, particularly to focus on the city of Detroit, which for folks, the University of Michigan started in the city of Detroit in the 1800s, but moved to a town about 45 minutes away, Ann Arbor. And so trying to continue that relationship with the largest city in the state of Michigan. But part of that is a deep racial history in the city, and trying to, again, make sure the Renaissance is equitable and just. But graduate students are coming back to school because they want new skills. They want to go into new career paths or get promoted in their current career. But what we see in our School of Environment and Sustainability is students who want to bridge their technical skills with some applied or social skills, right? And so we have a really biased set of students that care about the environment and care about society. But what we end up finding is that it's really hard to necessarily market yourself to corporations with that kind of, fuzzy description. And so how do we bring the private sector and the people that are actually employing our students along so they understand that they're getting a student that is, well-rounded. So that's another challenge for us.
Yeah, well, Federico, you might have something to say on that, because obviously KaosPilot has always worked with the private sector. And, your students are multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, doing all kinds of practical, hands-on, project-based work for external partners. What would you have to say on that?
So the whole education, as you were saying, is pretty much based on like sending students out on projects and building partnership networks, knowledge, experiences, et cetera. But I do have to say that right now we are facing a little bit of this translation issue, if you want. This because many of these skills that we perceive are needed right now to engage with the world are not something that you can clearly state on your resume or sponsor on LinkedIn. So also for our students, they have like some very tangible skill knowledge around basic stuff like project management, let's say, or like fostering spaces, or whole facilitating spaces, et cetera. But maybe when it comes to something that is more maybe more required, and how would we actually relate with each other? How do we engage with with meta crisis? How do we all these spaces of grief and transformation, et cetera? Then there is a translation needed. As a translation is not necessarily that easy to do. Most of all, when we are still nested within a system that just wants to have productive members of society that can get a job and and pay taxes. So I think there's a level of miscommunication there that needs to be worked on, even for our students. And again, they are facilitated by the fact that most of their network is built through the education, right? But we're seeing now, most of all, when organizations or corporations or whoever is running into harder time or harsher times, and the faucets are getting like tightened up a little bit, they're also willing to take less risks or be less curious, I would say.
That's interesting. I'm minded of the Law Students for Climate Accountability organization, which is an organization of law students based in the States at some of the elite law schools, Harvard, Princeton, and so on, and now obviously much more widely, who produce an annual scorecard of the extent to which law companies, law firms are responsible for supporting and facilitating climate change by working for, mining companies or whatever it may be. And one of the things they're doing, which I find quite interesting, is that instead of asking the students to present themselves on the terms that the firms are demanding traditionally, they're asking them to start challenging the firms at interview stage as to their values, and to see whether or not their values actually align with the students' values. And if they don't, then not to work for them. And I know this is a tough thing to ask a student when they've just spent, a couple $100,000 on getting qualified as a lawyer and wanted to pay off their debts. But there are growing numbers of students who are actually interested in looking into that more closely. And it's an interesting question for the big law firms that are so reliant on that intellectual capital as to whether or not they're prepared to risk having their values so disaligned from the values of new students coming through that they may actually undermine their business model because they can't secure the recruits that they were looking for. So I think that's quite an interesting area. We'll come on, I think, in a moment to some of the practicalities, but I just wanted to involve one of our attendees because I forgot to mention to everybody, there is a question and answer box for anybody who wants to contribute a question. So I'm just going to, I'll summarize very quickly what the question says. It basically says that academics are looking at a lot of areas, some of which are repeated and some of which don't necessarily help and are on areas that perhaps are not worthy of study. And the question really ends with, doesn't academia need to slim right down and reprioritize what it's looking at? Anybody want to respond to that? Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to. Yeah. I tend to agree. Part of it is a structural problem within academia in the sense that we don't publish negative fundings. So it is true, of course, tobacco is harmful and we've known for a long time. So, but there's also a, I think, critical problem in not having published many things that we discovered wouldn't work. And so people keep trying to figure out whether they work before finding they don't work, and they don't publish again, and it goes in a loop. I also think we need to accept that even if universities are charities in theory, they operate very much like a corporate business. I live in Edinburgh. Edinburgh's got 4 universities. It doesn't need 4 universities. And now the 4 universities are in a state of crisis because, you know, they can't recruit as many students as they projected. So there has been clearly a competition. There's been student accommodation that's been built to be more attractive compared to the university next door in the same town. So surely as a city, and the 4 universities in the city have failed to engage in a collaborative effort aimed at doing what universities should be doing, which is creating public good, advancing knowledge. So I do think it's important to slim down a bit and to move away from the corporate approach, because that's what creates the boom. More students, more degrees, more. Sometimes we differentiate degrees by a couple of modules, really, just to offer something different. There's a lot of marketing departments involved in branding the degrees.
So just to push back a little bit, Francesco. So you're not saying, though, let's reduce higher education. What you're saying is maybe let's focus a bit more closely on what we're doing in higher education. But the notion that people should continue to learn in different ways, in different forms, is that something you would still support? Or
Absolutely, yeah. I'm saying, let's say slimming down, it's the amount of research that you produce. It's so inflated by the system we're in. So the publisher parish is, you know, maybe familiar to us academics, but for the audience, there's a lot of pressure on academics to publish papers, and it's very hard to do 10 excellent papers in a year. So you do 2 very good papers and 8 pretty poor papers. That's the reality of it. Not everything is so worthwhile being called a scientific discovery, but there's so many journals that want to publish because of the journals that grown that basically the system just feeds itself on this perennial cycle of growth, which is quite unsustainable itself when we're talking about sustainability.
And it also feeds into league table positions, the quality of the research being assessed on a regular basis and then being fed into algorithms which determine how good your university is on an international market. And these tables have really significant impacts on a university's ability to recruit students and to sustain their business models, whatever those business models may be and how you might question them.
Yeah, I agree very much. One thing I want to say earlier, you were talking about Ivy Leagues at very prestigious university, and I think it's quite important to remember that the branding of the university degree is a huge amount of value. I've been involved for 10 years now in the interdisciplinary design for the built environment degree at Cambridge, and that's for mid-career professionals, study part-time, paid by their employers very often. No problem in recruiting. Like, it's quite a successful program. You try to run something very similar in a university that's not Cambridge, all of a sudden you struggle to fill the seats. So it's not just what we're offering, but also where we're offering it from.
Yeah. Okay. Tony, I can see you nodding. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, that last piece that Francesco just added, had me thinking about University of Michigan is launching a brand new innovation campus, which is just that. It's to target either early career or mid-career professionals who don't have 2 years to work on a graduate degree or 4 years to work on an undergraduate degree, and thinking about folks who will have companies that will pay for those degrees because of the business model that we are desperately seeking with the rollback of all types of other support, whether it's philanthropic or donors or federal research grants. But I struggle with that as we're trying to think through a new type of sustainability degree. Who is the market for that? Who do we serve? Some of the other earlier conversations made me think about that. As a public university, we have a responsibility to the taxpayers of Michigan who, fund some portion of the operation of the university in hopes that, their children will be able to come to the university at an affordable cost, right? But then as a public university, we also have this responsibility to society. And how do you serve those different audiences or stakeholders or partners? And then make sure, again, that the university is accessible and affordable. And so I think we're at a critical point in higher education, a value question, right? And that's what I was thinking about as Francesco was speaking, like, what is the value of a higher education? Is it to come out with a higher income? Is it to create a more well-rounded society? And then in the US, we just have a bunch of tiers of universities, whether they're Ivy Leagues, publics, privates, religious, technical schools. I mean, yeah, I think, like you said, here, there are probably 20 universities for a population of 1 million people. So it's really, it's really hard to see how this is sustainable itself.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I want to come back to this idea of whether or not the university model is actually, is it redundant? Is it not fit for the purpose that we're talking about, trying to address crises that we don't even really know the extent of what's going to happen. We can't really predict what's going to happen. But I did want to bring you, Sue, in back on that question about employers and the kind of the function of law schools in particular at the moment. You and I both work in law schools, and I'm aware that King's is an institute which has some very high quality, very gifted young people working who are really, really focused on getting that excellent training contract or that position as a pupil barrister in the most rewarding firm financially. And I was wondering to what extent that impinges on the work that you've been trying to do.
Well, going to the last question, I suppose I wanted to say that I think we have to acknowledge that it's the market which has caused the climate and nature crisis, and higher education is a huge market, and we're selling the idea that students are going to get, well-paid jobs, whilst knowing that, in many universities they won't necessarily be able to get those jobs. And we're bringing students from all around the world to, creating large emissions to be able to come to the global north, especially on the basis that that's going to help them get a job, whereas in countries like India there's 60% male unemployment. So if we're really thinking about a radical reimagining of the university of the future, then I suppose we need to rethink that and think about other places where people may be able to learn. But going back to the law students, you mentioned law students for climate accountability. So 55 UK firms facilitated 1.48 trillion in fossil fuel projects, according to their 2023 report. And I know that my students who come to the clinic, and they're so committed on working with communities in Latin America or India or in Uganda on an intervention in a deforestation case, are all looking for six-figure salaries at these law firms. I suppose my hope is that one or two of the students might choose to do something different, as they tell me that they will. My hope is that some of the students, when they go to those law firms, might do things a bit differently, having worked with those communities, might talk to their employers about how they do their due diligence before they decide, in the case of a British bank, for a huge dirty coal plant in Bangladesh, to finance the coal plant without looking at all the catastrophic effects on the environment. So I find that although students are committed to doing this kind of work, they have student debts to pay off, they have families to support, and they still, are targeting the, well-paid jobs in those kind of firms. So yeah, I don't know what you think about that, Steve.
Well, it's a reality. We're kind of dealing with a reality, aren't we? It's interesting. We've got a question in the Q&A from somebody who's saying, why do we all sound so defeatist? And should we not be encouraging students to challenge existing paradigms? And I think I would hope that what we're talking about here is really the reality of the situation that we encounter. But actually, I think all of us are real optimists because we are engaged in projects which are trying to do something a little bit different and which are about trying to get students to rethink the value of their education, the nature of their education, the nature of how they want to continue their education when they leave the university. So I hope it's a positive conversation. And Federico, I'm going to come to you actually because I do think the KaosPilot story offers some really interesting thoughts because again that idea of stepping outside of the educational system but being successful without necessarily offering the traditional degree and being able to sort of offer students the opportunity to explore those paradigms that our questioner speaks about. Perhaps you could talk about that a little bit more.
Sure, I think it's like one of the core elements of the education, if you want. The invitation is to actually engage in a 3-year transformational journey, right? That allows you to learn, re-engage with yourself, inner transformation, inner development, but also very much focus on developing, other skills, like very tangible skills. But like we try to actually engage within this, maintain this alignment within what is emerging within you, what is necessary to transform within you, how do you want to meet the world, meet others, etc. And what do you need to learn and who do you need to engage with to actually actualize that in the world. So I think the fascination or the interest and the value for the students beyond the paper, if you want, is very much that. Is like if what are you in service of? What future are you in service of? What vision are you in service of? And what do you need to learn and who you need to do it with so that can actually manifest into the world.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but would we all agree, as Federico has just said, that there is something beyond the paper that we would like to encourage our students to explore? You know, the focus tends to be on exams and exam results and grades and so on. Students want to get the best possible grade that they can. Are we seeking something different, Tony?
Yeah, I think we are. So real quickly, the Detroit Sustainability Clinic launched in the fall of 2021, recognizing that we do these 18-month master's capstone projects in our program. And students and their groups can pick clients from anywhere across the country. Some of them also do international projects. But we had an actual, living lab in our backyard with the city of Detroit that has an amazing climate action agenda. And we saw an opportunity for our students to help with the implementation of that. And so kind of to the questioner's question, this opportunity to be a part of something that you can actually see be implemented in real time. And so I'll give one quick example of a project. So the city wanted to have about 50% of its energy generation come from renewable energy. Several neighborhoods in Detroit are 50% vacant lots because they've done a lot of housing deconstruction. So students worked with the sustainability office of the city to actually come up with a solar neighborhood project. So city neighborhoods applied to be a part of the pilot. If they had more than 5 acres that were vacant, they could actually turn that into solar farms. And so our students work with the sustainability director in those communities, and the first 5 community solar farms are going to be coming online later this year. And so those students are thinking about working with the utility companies, with utility regulators, with third-party developers. And so you can see that translation that Federico was talking about, like they can go out and market those skills because they've actually kind of managed a project from almost start to finish. So yeah, I think we're still, somewhat optimistic about what this work can do and what working in communities can actually bring.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Francesco, I know that the new School of Architecture at the University of York is really developing a program that builds that connection with the local community. And I'm not going to say qualification is irrelevant, but it's the kind of the desire to get involved in that kind of experience, which I'm sure must drive students towards a subject like that.
Yeah, totally. There's also the idea, I mean, the built environment has an amazing opportunity because you can see the impact of what you do. So the idea is to launch an architecture clinic and actually support lab projects, but also get the students to build something every year. So some of the work I've done was with refugees, and the idea was to empower them in the reconstruction after either climate catastrophe or human-made disaster. And that was key, just getting them on site and building what the new shelter would be, make it incremental, make sure it would reflect their cultural norms, make sure it would be appropriate to the context. So this idea of learning through doing without thinking about what the grade or the final mark is going to be, I think it's applicable to so many subjects, and it's quite underexplored. In one of my modules is waste management. Actually, what students need to do is to monitor, assess, and reduce their waste over the course of the project. So I want photos, I want journaling, I want to understand, if they moved away from single-use plastic. The hardest part of this module was to get it approved from quality control and writing the module descriptor. And yeah, so there's a lot of self-imposed burden, I think, in not achieving the full potential of higher education.
Well, I think it's worth us. We've got about 10 minutes left to talk. I had loads more questions, but I wonder whether or not we should focus on the question about, what gets in the way of doing things differently in higher education. I mean, I once read an article, I forget who it was by, but they basically said if you were going to create a university in the 21st century from scratch, you would not do it in the way that all universities tend to do it, which is with, big, prestigious, high cost buildings and nice locations, all that kind of stuff. Do it in a completely different way. But what is it that's getting in our way? I want to put in my starter for five, as we say in the UK. My suggestion is that assessment is the problem. I've increasingly come to the belief, and I think it picks up on Federico's point earlier about, once you've done your high school education, you have most of the tools you need in order to succeed at a higher level. Most of them, I'm not saying all, and I know there is specialist knowledge that still need to be acquired. But in an odd sort of way, I wonder whether or not there's a way we could make education at university level a freer experience where students almost didn't have to worry about assessment at all. And they've already proven themselves by getting the place at university. Now, let's just let them develop and grow and see where they go and what they come out with. And if we really had to have an assessment, let's have a portfolio at the end, which was just a single portfolio where they have to justify what they've done for the last 3 years of their life. Maybe something like that might be an alternative approach. I mean, Sue, I know we're both lawyers, so we know how conservative the legal profession is. How do you think that kind of approach would go down? And do you agree that assessment is one of the things that is perhaps holding back the development of new ideas?
Well, universities all over the world are going mad about AI because they realize that students will be, probably writing their essays and assessments with AI. So I totally agree that we need to rethink assessment and that whole process. I wish my students could get credits for the stuff they're doing. I've got students who've just graduated or who are on their summer holiday and they're writing a report about methane from an oil field in the south of England, or they're meeting with students and lawyers in India about the case I spoke about the financing of the power plant. So yeah, why can't students be given credits for, the kind of projects that we were hearing about earlier and this kind of work, and have a more fluid type of curriculum? That's the kind of university I'd like to see in the future.
And how do you think the legal profession would respond to that, though, Sue?
I think that even the corporate law firms like to see that people have gained a wider range of skills. And the whole thing about AI is what's left that AI can't do, like now or in the future. And what it can't do is the human interaction, the person skills, obviously the critical analysis, not yet, but we remain to see whether it's going to be able to do that. So I think that maybe some of those law firms will change their approach to the student with the highest grade. And I think they're already starting to do that. They're not recruiting so much from Oxford and Cambridge, for example, which used to be almost their entire intake, because they've realized that they need more diverse candidates with a wider range of skills.
Tony, I'm going to bring you in because I've sort of suggested get rid of assessment and let people be free. I mean, obviously, engineering is a qualification-laden discipline. I'm guessing it wouldn't be feasible or of interest for students not to go through a fairly rigid curriculum.
Yeah, that is exactly what I was going to say. The rigidity of course delivery is probably one of our biggest barriers to thinking creatively and actually taking advantage of the time that students are on campus to fully be exploratory in all the things they want to do. We've kind of added that in with some of your kind of alternative courses or your extracurricular courses, electives that students get to take in addition to the core curriculum. In the Environment and Sustainability School, because it is an interdisciplinary school with engineers and scientists and social scientists, landscape architects, we do allow a little bit of that, but I think more co-teaching could probably be a great model where you kind of pass skills on across disciplines. So
I mean, does it is it actually getting in the way of students coming? I mean, we talk a little bit about the need for creativity, and one of the interests that I have in the sustainability clinic is that clashing of students from different disciplines and ideas, so that the history of art student sits down with the nuclear physicist, and somehow they have to work out how to talk to each other, and then the history of art student asks what seems an obvious question, and the physicist is struggling to understand how to answer that question. I mean, is that something that is possible to achieve in a subject like, engineering or the built environment for the future?
It would be great if all of the classes could be like that, and that's just not one experience, right? And I think we all probably are trying to do that in our own ways, but that might not be widespread. And so yeah, students are fortunate when they do get those opportunities, but every student doesn't get that, and so that might be a great way for us to start marketing our clinics, Steve.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Federico, obviously, I keep saying KaosPilot is kind of doing some of this stuff already. I mean, interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity is really, at the heart of your institution, and yet the students are still going out and getting great jobs afterwards.
They do. So we try to do whatever we can to actually free our spaces and free our minds when it comes to assessment and freedom from grade. But I was thinking as we were talking about this, and as we were talking before around unlearning, that I just had a conversation with a student the other day, and because I was introducing to them, and this is a second-year student, and we're introducing a way to assess their project period in using sociocracy. Involving all their peers, on reflections, grading, et cetera, et cetera. And what the students asked me was like, but then who's going to judge me? And I'm like, what? Judge? We've been here for 2 years. How can you say this? So it is still built and it's like really ingrained in people's minds, and this idea of measurability, and it's just really hard to let go, even if we do whatever we can to free ourselves from it.
Excellent. Okay, so I think we've got another question. Oh yeah, that's an interesting question. Thank you for raising this. Great to hear about some peer learning. Do you learn anything from your students? Okay, I'm going to go first on that actually. I learn from my students all the time. In fact, most of what I do involves me not being an expert and actually being somebody who requires the students to teach me effectively, and for me to then, I guess, to kind of exercise a degree of judgment based on experience and the work I've done over the years as to whether or not I think that's the appropriate approach to take. It's very rare that I'm really teaching them, if I'm honest. It's a lot of trying to find them, help them to find ways to voice their own thoughts and ideas and understanding. Francesco, I mean, How do you respond to
Yeah.
that question?
Sorry, I need to say something about the previous point as well, because that's close to my heart. I actually quite disagree with you. I'd flip the paradigm. So I'll remove any assessment for the first 16 years. That's when we kill a lot of creativity, I think, in humans. That's where I'll keep the development of a human free from being judged and numerical marks and having paths and avenues closed because a teacher said you're not good at something. But I'll keep some form of assessment later on, because I think in life, all of us are assessed in our job. So assessment in terms of receiving feedback from someone else is part of a daily routine. So I'll keep that. Yeah, I learn from my students a lot. Actually, very often I use the flipped classroom approach, also because otherwise it would be the same talk delivered every year. Yeah, you upgrade your slides a bit, you change your knowledge based on the latest learnings, but the idea of instead presenting the same problem, and then students can go and read a bit, and then the class time is actually used as an interaction. So we discuss together how that specific group sees their problem that year. And there's always a new way, unique way, because you see the different walks of life that the students bring contributing. And it becomes quite unique and very powerful, because I get a lot of new insight, a lot of unique perspective, a lot of things that I hadn't thought about. Yeah, that's what makes this job worth doing.
No, I couldn't agree more. Sue, I mean, how about you with your clinic work?
Yes, I mean, the climate and nature crisis is so massive, and we're trying to work on projects and cases. So, and there's only one of me. So the students and I are working together collaboratively, and, you know, they have all sorts of skills. They maybe speak another language, or they might know about international arbitration law that I may not know anything about. So yeah, we bring all those skills together. But then I suppose on a personal level, you can learn things from students. So I was recently in India working on an environmental justice course there, and I was working with a trans student, and she had the courage to go into the community, which was quite risky for her. So you learn lots of things from students.
That's interesting. Tony, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I think that opportunity to learn from students and their own lived experiences. So I teach a class on energy justice, and I ask the students to think about how it'll describe the energy system where they live and their interaction with energy. And you learn from folks who live in urban communities, rural communities, outside of the US. And I think that's good for them to learn from each other, but also for me to think about how I teach the course, right? Because it could be very US centric, but when I have international students in class, trying to figure out how we make sure we speak to, energy issues more broadly and globally. And so I learn a lot from students, and often try to have them bring in their own experiences, because the topics we tackle are so big, and the climate crisis is impacting people differently all across the world.
Yeah. Federico, I'm going to come to you for the final comment, but it has been fascinating to talk. It's interesting how we've kind of digressed a little bit from specifically talking about the climate crisis, and how there's a question in the chat at the moment, which we won't have time to get round to, about how we help communities move to greater self-sufficiency, for example. I think these are all issues that we would love to have more time to talk to. But Federico, maybe you have the last word about learning from students as peers, and in particular, I mean, I know that KaosPilot asks its students normally to have some prior experience before they come to KaosPilot, so they might have worked for an NGO, or maybe run their own business, or gone traveling, or whatever. Does that inform their experiences?
It does. It does quite a lot, and it still stands. Even if we've seen gradually also the age of our students going lower and lower and lower, from late 20s to early 20s now. But we do invite them, and the way that we welcome them into the education is also bringing their previous experience in whichever way that happened, from traveling to work with NGOs, from running businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And I think when it comes to learning from the students and with the students is one of the core elements that we have. We're so close with each other. We really try to empower them and have agencies in everything they do, and they are involved from top to bottom, not only in the classroom, but also in strategic decisions and hiring new people from staff and everything in between.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, I mean, we are right at the end of our time for today. Um, just one final comment from me, and that is I one of the things I sometimes find intriguing is that I don't, and maybe it's something to do with age, experience, I don't know, but I sometimes feel that students don't quite realize how powerful they are and how much they have to offer. And so the more that can be done at higher education level to help the students to realize that, I almost think that's kind of the key thing that we can offer. So yeah, I mean that's chair's privilege to have a final comment. So I'm just going to thank you all, Federico, Francesco, Sue, Tony. Thank you so much for spending your evening, afternoon, Tony, on this call. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. You can see in the chat that there is information about the recording of the event, which will be available at youtube.com/York Ideas. And there's another event on the 11th of June at 12 p.m., 12 noon, called Protecting Our Blue Planet. And you can get more details about that from the York Festival of Ideas.com. So without further ado, thank you all so much. Have a great day. And thank you everybody out there for listening and participating.